I never should have come to this cabin. The realtor warned me that its previous owners had disappeared without a trace last winter, but I was too stubborn to listen. The price was impossibly low for a fully furnished 3-bedroom in the Adirondacks, and I convinced myself it was exactly what I needed to finish writing my book. Now, as I sit here with trembling hands trying to document what happened, I realize the true cost of my bargain. The first few days were peaceful enough. I settled into a routine, writing in the morning, hiking in the afternoon, and spending my evenings by the fireplace. The cabin itself was beautiful in a haunting way, all raw timber and stone, with huge windows that looked out into the dense forest. But something felt off from the beginning. The previous owners had left everything behind. Clothes still hanging in closets, family photos on the walls, even a half-empty coffee cup in the sink. It was as if they had vanished in the middle of an ordinary day. I found the first clue on day 5. While walking the perimeter of the property, I noticed unusual tire tracks leading deeper into the woods. They didn't look like they belonged to a regular vehicle. They were too wide, too deep. Following them, I discovered broken branches and what looked disturbingly like blood spots in the snow. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but curiosity pushed me forward. That's when I found the first camera. It was an old trail camera, the kind hunters used to track game, secured to a massive pine tree. The casing was weathered and covered in rust stains, but when I checked, it still had power. My hands shook as I navigated through its memory card. Most of the photos were normal: deer, rabbits, the occasional fox. Then I reached the files from last December. What I saw made my blood run cold. The images showed a sequence of events over 3 nights. In the first set, dated December 12th, a dark figure stood at the tree line, barely visible in the low light. The next night, it was closer to the cabin, and I could make out more detail: tall, impossibly broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like hunting gear. But the third night's photos were the most disturbing. They showed the cabin's back door wide open, snow swirling inside, and long, dark, dragging marks leading into the forest. I spent the next day searching the cabin more thoroughly. The basement held another horrible surprise. Behind a false wall, I discovered what could only be described as a workshop. Metal tools hung from hooks, their surfaces dulled with rust and darker stains. Chains dangled from the ceiling. A large drain was built into the concrete floor. The implications made me sick, but I couldn't stop investigating. I needed to know what happened here. In a drawer beneath the workbench, I found a stack of Polaroids. Each one documented a different person. Men, women, all looking terrified, all bound to chairs in what I recognized as the cabin's living room. Some photos had dates written on them in neat handwriting, going back 5 years. On the back of each picture was a single word: processing. The most recent photo was dated just 2 days before the previous owners vanished. That night, I noticed lights moving in the woods. Using my binoculars, I could see someone carrying a lantern through the trees, heading to a clearing about half a mile from the cabin. Against all better judgment, I grabbed my coat and followed. The clearing, when I reached it, contained several suspicious mounds of disturbed earth. They were evenly spaced, each about 6 feet long. I didn't need to dig to know what they were. Back at the cabin, I found a journal hidden between the mattress and box spring of the master bedroom. It contained newspaper clippings about missing persons cases from the surrounding counties, dating back decades. Each article was annotated with detailed notes about the victims' processing and preservation. The latest entry described a new technique involving chemicals and low temperatures. The handwriting matched the notes on the Polaroids. I tried to leave that night, threw my belongings into my SUV and turned the key, but the engine wouldn't start. Looking under the hood with a flashlight, I discovered the battery cables had been cut clean through. My phone showed no signal. It hadn't all week, but now the situation felt dire. I was trapped here and someone wanted me to stay. That's when I saw them, reflections in the darkness beyond the window glass. Eyes, dozens of them, glowing red in my flashlight beam. They belonged to people standing motionless among the trees, all wearing the same hunting gear as the figure from the trail camera photos. As I watched in horror, they began moving toward the cabin in perfect unison. The sound of splintering wood filled the cabin as they breached the door. I ran to the basement, hoping to hide, but I realized too late that I was doing exactly what they wanted. The workshop was their domain, and I had just trapped myself. As their heavy boots descended the stairs, I found a hiding spot behind an old freezer. What I discovered inside it made me wish I hadn't looked. The freezer contained neat rows of vacuum-sealed packages, each one labeled with dates and names that matched the missing persons reports. This wasn't just a murder scene, it was a processing facility for something far worse. The previous owners hadn't disappeared, they were part of whatever this was. And now, listening to the methodical footsteps approaching my hiding spot, I realized I was about to become part of it too. I'm writing this now from my hiding place, hoping someone will find it and understand what happened here. The footsteps are getting closer. I can hear them breathing, a synchronized, mechanical sound that no human should make. They're clicking their tools against the concrete floor, creating a rhythm that sounds almost ceremonial. I now know why the previous owners vanished, why all those people disappeared. This cabin isn't just a location, it's a conversion point. They don't just kill here, they recruit. And soon, I'll be one of them, another hunter in the woods, watching through the trees for the next person desperate enough to buy a cabin for an impossibly low price. If you're reading this, run. Don't look for me. Don't try to investigate. Just know that if you see red eyes in the forest at night, if you hear perfectly synchronized footsteps in the snow, we've already chosen you. And like me, you'll soon learn the true meaning of processing. The isolation was supposed to be therapeutic. After 15 years as a 911 dispatcher, the constant stream of emergencies had finally broken me. My therapist suggested a few months of solitude, away from phones and screens and desperate voices. That's how I found myself in this cabin, 20 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by nothing but pine trees and silence. If only I'd known that silence could be more haunting than any scream. I brought one piece of technology with me, an old emergency radio scanner, a security blanket of sorts. I kept it turned off most of the time, but its presence comforted me, a reminder that I wasn't completely cut off from the world. The previous tenant had left it behind, along with a logbook filled with carefully documented frequencies and timestamps. I didn't think much of it at first. Many people out here monitored emergency channels, especially during fire season. 3 weeks into my stay, curiosity got the better of me. I started reading the logbook more carefully. The entries were meticulous, recording transmissions from police, fire, and rescue services across 3 states. But something was odd about the pattern. The previous tenant had circled certain frequencies in red ink, marking them with strange symbols I didn't recognize. These frequencies didn't match any standard emergency channels I knew from my years of dispatch work. One particularly cold night, I decided to try one of the marked frequencies. For hours, there was nothing but static. Then at exactly 3:17 a.m., the static changed. A pattern emerged, not voice communication, but a series of rhythmic pulses. As a dispatcher, I'd learned Morse code, but this was different. The pulses seemed to form a kind of countdown. The next day, I drove into town for supplies and noticed something I'd somehow missed on previous visits. A wall of missing person posters in the local grocery store. Dozens of them, dating back decades. Most were hikers or campers who had vanished in the surrounding forest. But as I looked closer, I saw a pattern. Every disappearance had occurred exactly 3 days after a major storm, just like the storm we'd had 3 days ago. Back at the cabin, I dug deeper into the logbook. The previous tenant had also tracked weather patterns, marking each major storm with the same strange symbols that appeared next to the radio frequencies. Looking at the dates, I felt my blood run cold. Every marked frequency had been active during a disappearance. I spent hours cross-referencing the disappearances with the logbook entries and a topographical map of the area. The missing people had all vanished within a 10-mile radius of my cabin. More disturbing still, when I plotted the locations, they formed a perfect spiral pattern, growing closer to my current location with each incident. The cabin's basement held another piece of the puzzle. Behind a stack of rusty filing cabinets, I found a hidden door. It led to a room filled with radio equipment, far more sophisticated than the scanner upstairs. Multiple receivers were still running, their displays showing active monitoring of those same mysterious frequencies. Pinned to the wall was a map identical to mine, but with additional markings showing what looked like signal triangulation points. Scattered across a workbench were photographs of radio towers, none of which appeared on any official maps. The photos were accompanied by technical diagrams and notes written in the same hand as the logbook. One phrase appeared repeatedly: "They're using the storms as cover." The writer had traced the signal patterns to 6 hidden towers arranged in a hexagonal pattern around the national forest. That night, another storm rolled in. The marked frequency came alive again, but this time I was ready. I recorded the transmission and spent hours decoding it. It wasn't Morse code, but it followed a similar principle. When I finally cracked it, I wished I hadn't. The message contained precise coordinates and what appeared to be vital statistics of hikers currently in the forest. I discovered that the basement room was part of a larger monitoring station. The previous tenant hadn't just been tracking the frequencies. They were investigating something massive. Their notes suggested a coordinated operation using the storm's electromagnetic interference as cover for something they called acquisition events. The radio towers weren't for communication, they were for tracking. Among the equipment, I found a GPS tracker showing multiple active signals moving through the forest. Each blip corresponded to coordinates from the decoded transmissions. The targets were being herded, guided by subtle manipulations of their phone GPS signals, leading them deeper into the woods, away from marked trails and toward predetermined collection points. In a locked storage room, I found something that finally revealed the operation's true purpose: a military-grade transport container equipped with cryogenic storage capabilities. The manifests attached to it listed biological samples and test subjects, each tagged with dates matching the disappearances. This wasn't just human trafficking, it was methodical harvesting. The previous tenant's research outlined a terrifying conclusion. A private military contractor had been using the forest as a testing ground for a new kind of tracking system, one that combined weather patterns, radio frequencies, and electromagnetic fields to manipulate human movement. The missing people weren't random victims. They were unwitting test subjects for a human hunting technology. Tonight, another storm is approaching. The radio is pulsing with fresh coordinates, and I can hear helicopters in the distance. But I'm no longer just an observer. The previous tenant didn't disappear. They're still here, hidden in a bunker deep in the forest, gathering evidence. They've made contact, and now I have a choice: leave with my discovery or join their mission to expose what's happening. I'm writing this as a record, a breadcrumb for the next person who might stumble upon this cabin. By the time you read this, I'll be in the bunker with the others, monitoring the frequencies, documenting the operation. The storms will keep coming, and people will keep disappearing, but now there are witnesses. If you're reading this, you've already found the first piece of the puzzle. The real question is, what will you do with it? My grandfather's legacy was unexpected. A fully equipped taxidermy workshop hidden in a remote cabin in Montana. As his only living relative, I inherited everything: the property, the tools, and his unfinished projects. I'd never understood his obsession with preserving dead animals, but as a struggling artist deep in debt, the inheritance seemed like a blessing. The cabin's isolation would give me time to catalog and sell his collection. I should have questioned why he specifically wrote in his will that I must do this alone. The workshop was a testament to his perfectionism. Every tool had its place: scalpels, forceps, needles, and specialized instruments I couldn't name. The preservative chemicals were neatly labeled, arranged by type and toxicity. What caught my attention were the custom tools, things I'd never seen in standard taxidermy guides. They seemed designed for much larger specimens than the deer and bears mounted on the walls. His ledgers told a stranger story. While the earliest entries detailed normal taxidermy jobs, hunting trophies and beloved pets, The later pages showed a shift in his work. The specifications became more elaborate, the materials more expensive. He developed his own preservation techniques, documented in cryptic shorthand. The most recent entries mentioned a special commission from someone he called the Collector. I found the first real warning sign on day 3, a padlocked door in the attic concealed behind a false wall. The key was in his desk, labeled commission storage. Inside, I discovered something that didn't belong in any legitimate taxidermist's workspace: a collection of human medical tools and what appeared to be surgical-grade preservation equipment. The walls were covered in anatomical diagrams unlike anything I'd seen before. Human forms meticulously annotated with measurements and chemical formulas. But these weren't standard medical illustrations. The proportions were wrong, the limbs positioned in ways that seemed to defy natural anatomy. My grandfather had modified them, adding his own notes about tissue preservation and joint articulation. Among his chemicals, I found formulas that weren't in any taxidermy manual. Complex solutions designed to preserve human tissue while maintaining perfect flexibility. The dates on the bottles matched his later journal entries, coinciding with a series of missing person cases I'd later discover in the local newspaper archives. Each disappearance aligned with one of his special commissions. The trail cameras around the property had captured horrifying evidence. Images of figures moving through the forest at night, but their movements were wrong, too fluid, too precise, like marionettes controlled by invisible strings. In some photos, they seemed to be hunting, working in coordinated pairs to track something through the trees. The basement held the worst revelations. Behind a false wall, I found a professional-grade cold storage facility. The room was lined with stainless steel drawers, each one temperature-controlled and labeled with dates and specifications. Most were empty, but some contained what he called his works in progress. I slammed them shut before I could see more than a glimpse. Financial records revealed the scope of his operation. Wire transfers from private collectors around the world, shipping manifests disguised as art exports, cryptocurrency wallets filled with millions in untraceable payments. My grandfather wasn't just a taxidermist. He was an artist of a much darker craft, creating custom displays for wealthy clients with unspeakable tastes. The commission gallery was hidden beneath the workshop, a climate-controlled showroom with museum-quality display cases and specialized lighting. Most pieces had been shipped to their buyers, but a few remained, draped in black velvet. They were posed in elaborate scenes, perfectly preserved moments of terror, transformed into twisted art pieces for private collections. His client portfolio was meticulously organized. Each collector had specific preferences, poses, expressions, scenes they wanted recreated. The level of detail was nauseating. Fabric swatches for clothing, paint samples for skin tones, references for hair and eye colors. These weren't random victims. They were carefully selected to match exact specifications. The cabin's security system was state-of-the-art, with camera coverage of every approach. Through them, I watched his partners continue their work, unaware of his death. They moved with practiced efficiency, following his documented procedures. The business wasn't going to stop just because its founder was gone. In fact, according to his calendar, the next commission was already in progress. The workshop's true purpose became clear when I studied the equipment. Complex pulley systems for positioning, custom-built armatures for support, specialized tools for joint articulation. Everything designed to transform living subjects into permanent displays. The technical brilliance was undeniable, even as it revealed the depths of his depravity. I spent days tracking his victims through news reports. He targeted artists, musicians, dancers, people whose bodies had been trained to move in extraordinary ways. Each disappearance was followed by a large payment from one of his collectors. The most recent article was from last week. A contortionist had vanished from a nearby town. According to the workshop calendar, her installation was scheduled to begin tomorrow. Tonight I'm preparing the workshop, not to continue his work, but to document everything before I contact the authorities. But as I organize the evidence, I'm starting to understand why he chose me as his heir. My art has always focused on the human form, on capturing movement in sculpture. Looking at his work, the The technical precision, the innovative preservation methods, the artistic vision behind each piece, I feel a horrifying sense of appreciation. The fax machine just hummed to life. A new commission is coming through from a collector in Beijing. The specifications are intriguing. A ballet dancer in mid-leap, suspended in a moment of perfect form. The payment offered is more money than I've seen in my life. My grandfather's tools are laid out, his formulas documented in detail, his techniques waiting to be mastered by someone with an artist's eye. The workshop lights are on, illuminating my inheritance in all its horror. I know I should run, should call the police, should burn this place to the ground. But I find myself instead reviewing his techniques, studying his formulas, understanding his vision. The next commission arrives tomorrow. Perhaps I'll just observe the process one time, document it for the authorities. But as I feel the familiar pull of artistic inspiration, I fear I'm about to discover why talent runs in families.